Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be painting the Vargskyr from the Cursed City game, and as you can probably tell from the shape of the base, I'll be using this model for my old world Vampire Counts army. This is a really simple paint scheme, but I think it's an effective way to get a good looking monster into your army quickly and easily. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. Let's get into it. So our starting point will be a grey primer. I've applied this with an airbrush, but you could just as easily use a grey sear spray can from Citadel. We're then moving on to Citadel Magos Purple Contrast, and we're going to be placing this over all of the kind of membrane type, wing type areas of the model. We'll be placing it on the ears, also over the hands and the feet of the model, and in some of the recesses. Next up, we'll be using two more contrast paints, Guilliman Flesh and Basilicanum Grey. We're going to be applying a 50-50 mix of this over the entire model. This is not diluted at all, this is straight from the pot onto the palette. Mix it together in a 50-50 ratio and then just apply it over the whole model, including over the purple areas from the previous step. The next stage we'll be using Citadel Varghulf Flesh, and we're going to be applying a light dry brush of this over the entire model. As you can see, I'm just using a cheap makeup brush just to give a really light dry brush over the entire model. Try not to go too heavy with this, the aim is to just pick out the details and just have a really light dry brush layer. Next up will be another dry brush layer using Citadel Pallid Witch Flesh. This time we're going to be going even lighter than the previous layer, and we're going to be kind of just hitting the very top highlights where the light would catch the model. So the back of the fur, the face, the hands, the tops of the legs, those types of areas. Just be really subtle with this, we just want to use it just to pick out those prominent details. To follow that up, we'll be using some Berserker Bloodshade from Citadel, and we're basically going to be applying this over all of the areas where we originally placed the Magos Purple in the first step, just to bring back some of that colour. There's also quite a few areas on the model where it has some kind of scars and things like that, so we'll be using a smaller brush just to kind of put some colour into those areas as well. We'll also apply it into areas like the recesses on the face and in the mouth. Places like that. just remembered here that I've forgotten to do the feet, so I'm just going back over and covering those. Just in the area where the kind of the red meets the previous layer, and just using some water just to kind of feather it in and just blend that into the previous layer, just so it's not a stark kind of line where you where the red ends and the kind of skin colour begins. The next stage will involve just painting all of the fur areas on the model with wildwood contrast. This is not diluted at all, this is just straight from the pot. And yeah, just cover all of the fur areas on the model. Next, we're going to be using Black Templar contrast, and for this stage we're just going to be painting all of the claws and the teeth. I'm also going to apply the black contrast to the very edges of the fur, so along the spine and just along the edges of kind of each of the fur areas, just to give a bit of variation in the colour. Where the black meets the previous brown layer, I'm just using some water just to feather out the paint whilst it's still wet, just to kind of blend it into the previous layer. Next, I'm going to apply a light brown dry brush over all of those fur areas that we've just painted. I'm using this light brown dry brush paint from MIG, just because that's what I had handy, but any light brown paint will do. If you've got like Bane Blade Brown from Citadel or anything like that, it should do the same job. I'm then using some Citadel Karak stone just to do a very light dry brush on the edges of the fur. I'm kind of applying this on the areas which are kind of furthest away from where we placed the black in the previous step. And then to finish off this stage of the fur, I'm just going to use some Mechanicus Standard Grey and just put a very light dry brush over all of the areas where we placed that black contrast earlier in the process. I'm also going to apply this over the teeth, just very carefully, very lightly, and also over the claws. Next, I'm just going to be placing a finer highlight onto the claws and the teeth of the model, just to bring out some of those finer details. I'm using Scale 75 Artist Arctic Blue. If you don't have this particular paint, don't worry too much. You could always use any kind of lighter grey that you might have in your collection. Should do the job just fine. Next, we're going to be painting the eyes of the model, so I'm going to start with a base layer of pallid witch flesh. For the first eye, I do apologise that my thumb is right in the way and you can't actually see what I'm doing. Hopefully you should be able to see much better when I paint the second one. Once that base coat's dry, I'm going to be giving the eyes a quick glaze of Scale 75 Red Ecstasy fluorescent paint. A couple of thin coats, just thinned with water. Just make sure the first layer is dry before you go back in for the second coat. Finally, I'm just going to place a tiny dot in each of the eyes using pallid witch flesh. Next up, I'm going to be using Scale 75 Deep Red, and I'm just going to be painting the entire base using this colour. This is just to fit in with the basing theme of the rest of my army. Feel free to base yours however you like. Next up, we'll be doing some oil washes. I've just included a freeze frame of the items that I'll be using. So we're just going to quickly mix up a brown oil wash and a black oil wash. Just put a blob of kind of oil paint of each colour into a little metal kind of mixing tray. I'm just going to mix that into like a thin consistency. I usually leave the blob of oil paint on the edge of the dish, and then you can kind of use that to adjust the thickness of the wash just to get it kind of where you want. You can see kind of on the edge of the dish there the consistency. So it's really transparent, not too thick. To be honest, it's mostly white spirit. I'm actually using Sansador, which is like an artist's kind of white spirit. To be honest, you can just use regular white spirit. The only difference I've noticed really is the smell. If you don't like the smell of white spirit, use the artist stuff. It's slightly less of a strong smell to it. But if you're not bothered by the smell, just use regular white spirit. It's exactly the same thing. So with the brown oil wash, we're literally just going to cover the whole model with it, even the base. Just go over everything. It will look terrible when you put it on, but don't worry, we're going to come back and fix that in just a moment. And then I'm just going to be placing the black just on those black areas of the fur, on some of the claws, and I think I put some on the rocks on the base as well. Next up, I'm going to be using a makeup sponge just to clean up some of this oil paint. So what you want to do with this is you just want to go over everything really, and just kind of wipe the oil paint away, so it kind of brings back some of that original colour. It will leave the oil paint kind of set in the recesses, so we just want to kind of use it to almost kind of buff that oil paint away, and just kind of clean most of it away, just so that the wash is just left in all of the recesses. Usually I would probably recommend varnishing a model before applying oil washes, but kind of the effect that I'm going for on this one is quite a dark paint scheme, so I don't mind the oil paint staining the previous layer a little bit, so that's the reason I haven't varnished it on this occasion. And this is what it looks like after about 20 minutes sitting outside in the sun. Obviously if it's not a sunny day, it's going to take a bit longer to dry indoors. At this stage you don't even necessarily need to wait for it to completely dry. Just wait for most of those spirits to evaporate, and then you can move on to this stage here. So basically what I'm doing is I've got a dish with a small amount of white spirit in it, with the sponge in the white spirit, and I'm just going and just doing a final cleanup, just kind of the highest areas, just to bring back some of those highlights. Next, for my basing scheme, I'm just going to give it a quick dry brush of Wild Rider Red, followed by a very light dry brush of Lugganath Orange. Next stage is totally optional. This is just to kind of tie the model in with the theme of the rest of my army. So I'm using scale 75 deep red, thinned 3:1 with airbrush thinner, just to give the model a thin kind of glaze from underneath, just to kind of give the effect of like a red kind of underglow coming from that base. So I've just done a few finishing touches off camera. So all that includes was a satin varnish coat through the airbrush. And then I've just added some blood effects to the claws, only a tiny amount, just to add a little bit of interest there. I think I added some to the mouth as well. I've added some dark earth weathering pigment to the base, just to kind of dial that red back a little bit and just make it look a bit more natural. I added some tufts and painted the base rim with a matte black. So there we have it. I think the total paint time on this one was around 2 to 3 hours, probably closer to 3 if you include the drying time for when I had it, had the oil washes drying outside. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts, questions or feedback, please leave them in the comments down below. Please also give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for future videos, and I'll see you on the next one.